I'm with Susanna Kokkonen from Christian Friends of Yad Vashem. Now, Susanna, what is Christian Friends of Yad Vashem?
Yeah, so Yad Vashem was actually established already in 1953. The Israeli Knesset passed a special law to establish it. And then in 2006, Yad Vashem decided that they needed a special program to reach out to Christians around the world. And so they decided to establish the Christian Friends of Yad Vashem. And basically the goal was that Christians who would come to visit, they would have a special program, they would be able to ask questions, have a time of reflection. And also we wanted to connect Christians to the Christian theology that was partly anti-Semitic and is the background of the Holocaust. We wanted to teach about not just about the camps, but also Jewish life in Europe before the war. How did the Holocaust come to happen? And even the aftermath of the Holocaust, which is very significant now since we are celebrating the 70th anniversary of the State of Israel, which of course was built by the Holocaust survivors.
And today we're looking at Kristallnacht, which happened in Germany and Austria. Tell us a little bit about what happened before that event, the history and the story that built up to this terrible night.
Yeah, so I think it's very important for us to look at the 1930s, although the Nazi Party was established in 1919. And from the beginning, it had this very intensely anti-Semitic agenda, meaning that actually they did not see the Jews as just a religious group that they would persecute or just a group that for any other reason they wanted to persecute, but they saw them as a genetic problem. In other words, the racial theories were added to the previous already existing forms of anti-Semitism. But the problem now, of course, is that when you are a genetic problem, you cannot change it. So there's nothing you can do about it. So this is the background. So when Adolf Hitler comes to power in 1933 in January, already in March, all over Germany, we have anti-Jewish riots. And we are talking about violent riots against the Jews. But at this point, the regime is not openly taking responsibility. It's looking like these are more spontaneous acts of violence, even though we know that they were not spontaneous. Then, in April, we have this boycott, a day of boycott against Jewish-owned businesses, which you might think that as you think about it in economic terms, that it's not maybe that important. But on the other hand, it clearly shows the regime how far they can go, how much are the ordinary German citizens willing to tolerate. Seeing these armed Nazi guards outside Jewish stores, and it says that it's forbidden to go in, very few people are going to have the courage to disobey. And then, of course, Jewish doctors are banned from practicing public medicine, and there's like a process that has started to delegitimize the Jews of Germany and to make them into lesser citizens. And the Jews feel this atmosphere. So in the 30s, whereas they have felt that they are German, that's the most important part of their identity, and then they are Jews. Even many Jews, they call themselves Germans of the Mosaic persuasion. In other words, they put the German identity before anything else. And then, of course, they start to also themselves question their identity when their identity as Germans is actually taken from them. So in June, well, let's say May 1933, we actually have public book burnings where books that are considered Jewish, written by Jews, or books that are considered to have a certain kind of democratic spirit or pacifist anti-war spirit are burned. So these book burnings are also very important because Heinrich Heine, a German Jewish poet, has said just less than 100 years earlier that where books are burned, their people will be burned. So this is like a model, and it shows what is going to happen somehow. And then by June 1933, we have 27,000 people arrested. These would be opponents, potential opponents of the regime, like socialists, communists, trade union leaders, people like that. So you can see how from the end of January until June, already there's been a very remarkable big change in the society. And all the time the Jews are targeted, and there's like this invisible wall that is built between the Germans and the Jews, and sometimes these invisible walls are much harder to climb than walls that you actually can see. So the goal is to make it intolerable for the Jews to remain in Germany and to make them feel that they are less than citizens, less than Germans. Now, 1938, many historians actually speak about it as the fateful year. So people always try to understand where comes the point when you can no longer turn back. And that's a very important question, because I think there could be two ways to look at it. One is, when is the first action taken where the regime openly identifies with this very anti-Jewish attitude and where all of Jews become targets? And I think the April 1933 boycott of Jewish stores, that is where the regime is not hiding that all the Jews are targets and that the regime is openly identifying with that action. But 1938 is very important, because by 1938 the society has changed very much. First of all, the Nazi Party has become the party that controls really every aspect of citizens' lives. It's the only party, and it's very strong, and they don't have the means that we have today to spy on people and so on and so forth, but they are doing everything they can. So they have created an atmosphere of terror. And also, when they have taken the political opponents away, when they have arrested them, they have contributed to this increasing terror that people are too afraid to do anything, even if they would like to. 38 is very important also in terms of foreign policy, because you remember the case of Czechoslovakia. That little country is sacrificed by the Western powers who believe that we will have peace because we are peace out of Hitler, which of course is doomed from the beginning. So in October 1938, something else happens that is like the first time that the regime is doing this kind of action, and it's that Jews who have Polish citizenship, who are living in Germany, are actually evicted. And it's the first time Jews are deported in larger numbers, and now nobody wants them. So they are actually abandoned. They have nothing in a Polish border. And so what happens is that one of them, there's a family there called Greenspan from Hanover, and the father manages to write a letter to his son Herschel, who is only 17, living in Paris, and he describes the terrible things that are happening, what is happening in Germany and what is happening specifically to them. And Herschel, this 17-year-old boy, walks into the German embassy and shoots a very low-ranking diplomat. Well, he is arrested and he is interrogated. And I want to read to you what Herschel says in response. "It is not a crime to be Jewish. I am not a dog. I have the right to live, and the Jewish people has the right to exist in this world. But everywhere I am persecuted like an animal." Now, actually, the interesting thing is that most of the people think that it's because of this, because he shot the diplomat, that the Kristallnacht happens. But actually we know that the Nazi leaders, they were gathered together at the time, and they were actually planning this action. So I want to emphasize that the night of the Kristallnacht, it's a pogrom. It happens the night of November 9th to 10th, 1938. But if you travel in Germany and you go to some of the places and you see some of the places where the synagogue stood, the local people will tell you that actually in their village it happened already on the 8th. So this means that the orders were given, and some of the people, they were so eager to do it that they started it already on the 8th. This is what I have personally heard from people who were living there at the time. So what happens is that about 1,400 synagogues all across Germany are burned, and what is important to realize is that there's a special aggression towards the Jewish prayer books, Torah scrolls. They want to shame the Jews, but they also want to especially do shameful things to these objects of prayer. And that's, I think, is very important now to understand that what do the Torah scrolls contain? They contain God's law. And that law is actually the basis of the Western society until today. Our law, our system of justice comes to God's commandments. So they have this aggression towards that law, and they cannot go against God, so they go against the Jews. And the visible objects, the things that represent something much higher, that is where the aggression is the greatest. And that really is very interesting, because at the end of the war, in the Nuremberg war trials, one of the chief prosecutors, he argues that even though the Nazi criminals say that they have not done anything illegal because they were obeying the laws of the Nazi German state, he says that actually that does not matter because that whole state has become an illegal state. So it's very interesting, this connection between God's law, the aggression of the Kristallnacht, and really this becoming an illegal state in so many different ways. Anyway, so the Jewish-owned shops and businesses, of course, become targets. About 30,000 Jewish men are taken to concentration camps. And I would say that this is also an important time because people have been, to a certain extent, people have been able to leave Germany and they have been trying to immigrate. At this point, the world, the Western powers know what is happening in Germany, but actually soon those doors for the Jews to come in, for the Jews to be able to immigrate to other countries, start closing. So that's it represents the, this is a very open, violent action by the regime against the Jews. So the only thing where it can go to, the only direction where this can go to would be violence towards people and their persons, taking their property from them completely. And so, and that happens then very soon after. So it's like, this is like some kind of turning point, and that's why historians call it the fateful year.
Do you think this was the catalyst that started the Holocaust?
Well, I mean, there are people who define the Holocaust from 1933 until 1945. But the period of the mass murder, we would define it from 1941 to 45. So I think it's a matter of how you define it. But I would say that many historians would say that this is the point, when you are driving a car and going very fast, at a certain point it's hard, you won't be able to brake. You are going too fast, so you can't stop before, the crash or whatever's going to happen. So in a way, this is like politically, and in terms of the persecution, this is the point where it would be very hard to change the direction this society has taken. And that's very tragic, because it means that often people only see the direction very clearly when it's already gone to that point where you can't change it anymore.
Okay, Susanna, thank you for sharing about Kristallnacht.
Thank you.